Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the audience from different parts of the world. Welcome to this webinar. This is one of the series of webinars organized by the Computational Social Science Laboratory, Faculty of Social Science, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I'm Prof, a co-director of this lab. I'm very pleased to chair this webinar. And today we are very delighted to have Dr. Jianghao Wang here. And he will give a talk titled Using Social Media Data to Promote Decision Making. And in this talk, he will present studies using billions of geotagged social media posts and state-of-art natural language processing techniques to provide valuable insights for researchers and policymakers about their preference globally. And before the talk, let me introduce him briefly to you. Dr. Wang is currently an associate professor at the Institute of Geographical Science and Natural Resources Research, Chinese Academy of Science. He is also an associate professor at the University of Chinese Academy of Science, and previously a visiting research scientist at the MIT Sustainable Urbanization Lab. And I think the lab director is Professor Siqi Zheng, right?
Right.
And his research interests include GI science and computational social science. Jianghao has done a lot of brilliant work and published in recent years 2 papers in Nature Human Behavior, which is fantastic. Okay, so without further ado, please join me to welcome Jianghao. So now, time is yours.
Okay, that's my first share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to appreciate Professor Huang Bo's invitation, and thank you for your kind introduction. And I'm very pleased to join the webinar hosted by the Chinese University of Hong Kong and the lab of the Computational Social Science, which is very interesting to me. At least previously, I joined several webinars hosted by this lab. I really honored to be invited to share a talk here. Today, my talk is about using social media data to promote decision making. So my talk will contain the following 4 parts. First, I will introduce why we conduct this research, and then some main method and techniques we adopt for the social media analysis. Then the third, I will introduce about the 3 case studies, followed by the discussion and the future perspectives on this field. So as introduced my framework, today I will talk about my work contains the following part. This is the framework, which is contains the something about the social media data and what kind of techniques, for example, the natural language processing, after combine the GIS and the econometrics modeling. This triangle is my 3 main content in my research, at least in this talk. We'll know the social media. You know, I think everyone here maybe are using social media every day. Social media has becoming the crucial computational tools for information generation and information diffusion. But my question is, can evidence drawn from the social media can inform and enhance the public service and inform public policy making? in this talk, I will try to use this framework to show how the social media big data while its component with the new techniques can be used for the policy design. Then I will show 3 examples, including the coronavirus disease and air pollution, climate change, some real-world applications to show these applications when combine the social media data coupled with the machine learning techniques and the causal experiment design can inform public policy making. Before my start, I would like to introduce the Global Sentiment Project, which was initiated by the MIT Sustainable Urbanization Lab, which I also previously a research scientist there. During my stay there, we initiated this project with the name of Global Sentiment. Actually, is the following works was mainly conducted under this project. In this project, we use billions of social media data and we use novel natural language processing to extract the sentiment and the topic modeling from the social media. This is an open collaboration platform initiated by the MIT Sustainable Urbanization Lab and also the Chinese Academy of Science. We also collaborate with the Harvard University, the Center for Geographic Analysis. They provide several years of geotech social media data. And our team have the Professor Siji Zheng, which is a PI. I'm also the research scientist there. And I'm leading several young talent scholars to finish this work. So next, I will talk about the why we choose social media data for this research. First, I think I said maybe everyone here joins this talk using social media, such as Facebook or Twitter. In China, we mainly use Weibo. Besides, our government and the public service delivers is taking place in a changing world. A significant level of the social, economic, and political activities now happening on the internet. In computational social science, especially recent years, computational social science is a promising area, and it's an interdisciplinary area in both the geographic research and also the social science, which using always traditionally using the millions of large data set, such as the billions of human-centered data set to analyze the, for example, social media data, present an exciting perspective for the policymakers and the researchers. It makes it possible to seek information for individuals across the disparate geographers, autonomous, and social sites, and also can highly reduce the cost of the data collection procedures. Then, why we choose the social media? Because it's a good alternative to the traditional survey data. As we all know, the traditional social science cannot leave the surveys or the census data set, but the traditional surveys always is costly, rising response rate, and the social disparity bias, and also it's difficult to accurately around the unexpected event. So you can see some like the cost and of the limitations of the traditional surveys. But there are some relative advantages of the social media data. For example, it's relatively cheaper to collect the data set. And also it can conduct the quasi-instantaneous analysis and also some other relative advantages. For example, like the data set is always larger. For example, like have billions or millions of users posts on the social media every day, and also it's real-time update platforms. There are also some challenges and limitations of social media data. For example, when we talk about the social media data, the first thing is we can think in our thought is the privacy issues and the data owner issues. We doesn't have the data set, but the data set is from the social media companies, and everyone share their privacy on the social media. So when we use it for research or policy making, we also admire their users' privacies. And also some challenge, for example, the inaccuracy of the users' informations. And for the spatial study, maybe also the inaccuracy of the locations. The third very important thing is the representativities. So social media users tend to be younger, wealthier, and more educated. So this is the main, I think, the limitation of the social media data set. So you need to admire the data, the sample bias issues when you use the social media data, and also some other things. But there are also some challenges when you try to use social media for your research. For example, how to use the latest state-of-the-art natural language processing in your research, and also need for the human validation is always a challenge when you're using the social media data plus the computer science for your research. And the validation study tests the consistency between the social media metrics and the real world outcomes. And social media has been found to be successful matching the mobility, population well-being, and the public opinions. But there are also several challenges for the social science studies. But although it has several challenges and limitations, but we think the social media data is a good data source for the research and policy makings. There are tremendous of research in this field. For example, like the network-based research, because everyone knows that social media is a good way to study the social online, especially the online social networks. For example, study the strength of social time, the structure of the polarization, and the vitality and the spreading of the misinformation and languages. And also some study concentrate on the population concentration and the movement. It's a good way to study the human mobilities. For example, like during the COVID pandemic, many people using social media such as the Twitter and the Facebook data study human mobility behaviors. And also you can use the social media post to study, for example, the topic prevalence over time, like the information diffusions on the networks, especially to predict and the spreading of the epidemics, for example, like COVID-19, and also several using the sentiment analysis to study the difference by the culture and the cycles, and also the what's the effect of policy interventions, and also response to the extreme climate, like the disasters, air pollutions, and all the temperatures. I will introduce some details later. So beyond the social media data, to better understand our world, we not only concern about our society, our social society, we also care about the physical world. the traditional way to study the to study or modeling our world is that we use some like remote sensing techniques, GIS and GPS, coupled with the statistic and sample surveys to better understand our physical world. But now, several technologies, including the social media, provide some like new technique to better understand our societies. This technique have some characteristics, that is to simulate human being ways of thinking. For example, like the cloud computing is like human brain. Artificial intelligence is just like our thinking mode. Mobility index internet just simulate human neural network transmissions. And the Internet of Things or sensor net like our sensory organs. Social media is just like a social ways in the cyberspace, right? Our studies try to combine both of the physical sensings and the social sensing to better understand our full physical world and social world. So we divide our real world into 4 space. For example, like the physical space, human activity space, social economic space, and the cyberspace. So social media is a good way to study this, both the cyberspace and the interaction between the human space, physics space, social economic, and the interaction between these 4 space. For the physics space is very easy, right? We all know it means using the sensing physical structures using the remote sensing techniques, such as the remote sensing techniques. The target is better get the basic information about our, for example, like our cities, like the land use, land cover, building, road, greens. Second is human activity space. It means sensing human activities or behaviors with spatial temporal big data. The goal is to understand human dynamic distributions, human mobilities, or the living behaviors. For example, using the mobile phone or smart car data. Third is like the social economic space. It refers to sensing, for example, like the urban social economics with the Internet of Things and the electronic business data, which can adapting the social economic related geospatial big data to better understand better understanding our social and economic systems. The last is like our today's main topics about the cyberspace, sensing urbans, for example, sensing urban in cyberspace with the social media and the mobile phone data like the Twitter and the Facebook. The objective is to understand citizens' behaviors or human environment through the online social media and study the relationship between the physical and the cyberspace. So we believe that the social media data, especially backup with and the cross-referenced by other kind of data sources, like I introduced before, present a powerful opportunities for public policymakers and the service provides to develop a rich source of real-time, reliable data about the social, economic, and political issues. So it mainly contains the following 3 parts. I call it like the sensing, computing, and the decision-making processing. So, next, I will just introduce some like social media analytic method used in our study. So the data we use for this study mainly composed the billions of geotagged Twitter or Weibo posts globally. So there are some native features, including the post ID, user ID, exact location for post content, Beyond that, we also collect the users' social demographic informations. For example, like the gender, the race, and also some like education level. But some user maybe not report their information, but we can use some like machine learning techniques to extract their personal informations from their historic posts and others. Another good valuable information is there about their exact locations, because my research mainly conducted in space. So the exact location, for example, like longitude, latitude information, and their administrative information is valuable for me to study the spatial temporal phenomena. This figure just shows the spatial distribution of the posts, including both the Twitter and Weibo we collect globally. But you can see there are some oversampling in the developing regions like the USA, Europe, Japan, China, but some like underdeveloped region such as Africa, the data is sparse, right? Beyond the social media data, like the Twitter and the Weibo, we also collaborating with Tencent, which is the largest social, the location-based service providers in China. As you know, Tencent is the most popular social network in China. They have mobile phone apps, including the WeChat and also QQ, which allows to mapping the geographic locations with GPS. Now the Tencent more than have the 900 million users per day, and we generate over 16 billions of location requests per day. It provides valuable data source study human behaviors over space. Using this data, I just introduced one study I conducted several years ago. We're using the geotech social media data, Weibo, which contains 400 million of Weibo posts globally, because we all know that only Chinese using the Weibo dataset. So it provides it can answer the very traditional questions. Where are the Chinese over the world? So you can see it provides a very direct way to mapping the Chinese globally. If we zoom in to Europe, you can see we can find Chinese footprint all over the Europe. Maybe some like a tourism, tourist, or some like the Chinese who stay there. Another main techniques I use in my study is the natural language processing called NLP. So this idea is now very popular in computer science, because now recently I just read this book, The Text as Data, wrote by Justin Grimmer. So it's very fantastic book to introduce how we can use the computational text analysis to learn about our social world. So the natural NLP is an area of computer science, and also the artificial intelligence, because most of the NLP algorithms now are employed by the AI method. It concerns with the interaction between the computers and the human natural languages. It particular how to program computers to process and analyze large amount of natural language data. Being an AI techniques, I think the text mining or the text analysis with the NLP techniques, it can transfer the unstructured. We all know the text data is like the video and the picture data is like unstructured data from the document or the database. for example, and also like what started here, the social media data will be a valuable data set for valuable techniques for data analysis or to derive the machine learning algorithm for better understanding of humans' languages. There are so many ways to understand the text, but here I only introduced one issue about the sentiment analysis. So the sentiment analysis is also known as the opinion mining or emotional AI in computer science. It's like the widely adopted NLP method for the text mining. It mainly uses the NLP text analysis or computational logistics and biometrics to systematically identify, extract, or quantify and study the affected state and the subject informations. So it's like sentiment analysis, mainly like continuous scores, like the range from continuous scores range from, for example, from 0 to 100. Like 100 could be very positive emotions or positive sentiment, but like the 0 or 10, like the negative emotions. So it's very simple but useful to understand people's emotions and subject well-beings. There are many ways to employ for the sentiment imputations. But here, I just divided into two ways. Like the first way is a dictionary-based approach. The second is a deep learning-based approach. The dictionary approach, first is the widely used, is developed by the psychologist named LIWC. It just assigns the positive or negative emotions to each meaningful word. It's like the searching and matching method. So that's why we call it dictionary based, because every sentiment, they have every, this method, every method just have dictionaries containing the word about the positive words or negative words, but they can use some like matching way to determine the sentiment for each sentence or paragraphs. But there are also several dictionary-based approach like the headometer, which is also widely used in computer science. And also we can use the emojis, because when we started social media, we found that many of the posts have the emojis there. So emojis is a naive but very interesting way to study human sentiment. But today, I mainly talk about the deep learning approach. The deep learning approach, I think it just transfer the post into like the post, just like a text, transfer it into a vector. For example, the sentence, you can transfer it into a vector, including both the center word and the context, and we can use the neural network to train the model and obtain the sentiment scores. Here, I just introduced one algorithm with the name of BERT, which is developed by Google. They have achieved. Why I use this? Because it's a multi-longitudinal models, so they can processing the word languages, over 100 word languages. So when we started the global phenomena, it's very useful. But most of the method here, for example, the dictionary-based, are most English-based. So it's hard to study the word languages. So for the BERT algorithm, especially the sentiment imputations, we train our sentiment classifiers on a labor date from a sentiment 140, because this algorithm is trained by using the Wikipedia data. We label the data, but it's not work conducted by us. Previously, the researchers had provided the label data set. We just train it, our machine learning models on the post and label with the sentiment state and use the developed models to label all the posts. Let's say we, after training the models, we classify or determine every post into one scores. And we also validate our algorithm with a traditional dictionary-based method, for example, like LWC, LIWC. So we found our predictive accuracy is over 80% for the English language content and 95% for other major languages. For each post, we will assign a sentiment score between 0 and 100 to indicate the happiness levels. So after introduce the basic about the natural language processing, I would like to introduce 3 case studies, which was published recently. The first is about the COVID-19 and the global sentiment research. For this research, we mainly want to answer the question, how about the psychological impact of COVID around the world? We all know the impact of COVID-19 on the physical health of the world citizen is extraordinary. But the pandemic effect on the mental health could be even more far-reaching. When we conduct our research, actually it's the first wave of the COVID. But now actually COVID has lasting for over 3 years long. So it's like have a significant impact on people's mental health. So mental health is a crucial topic underexplored for the pandemic. Mental health also is not easy to reflect in the data set. The traditional way is like as we all know, several large studies during the pandemic, just using some interviews or surveys, especially conducted by the sociologist or the psychologist or the economist. They always, the traditional way is they conduct large surveys. And also several psychologists and economists, they also doing some field experiment. For example, like conduct several like the random controlled trials, RCTs, to study the impact of pandemic on the mental health. But here we try to use the social media big data. Before we conduct, we have some literary reviews. As we'll see, there are tremendous of studies using social media to study the impact of COVID on the people's mental health. But there also have some shortage. I think the main shortage or the significant our innovation data because our data is global coverage and we have the state-of-the-art natural language processing algorithm to measure the public sentiment. For most of the research, they lack a global study to measure the sentiment shocks. And most of them only use the hashtags. For example, when they mentioned about the COVID, they collect data. That's why they're easy to collect their data. But it's very hard to collect the data globally. Especially, that's why we have this valuable data set to study these questions. This paper was just published this year. And in this paper, we try to answer the following 3 questions. The first question is how to measure and model the invisible sentiment during the pandemic. The second question is the global evidence of mental resilience during the COVID. And the last is quantify the impact of lockdown interventions and the policy implications. To answer this question, we have some data method. For example, to answer this question, we use the billions of geotagged social media data collected globally. We use the BERT NLP method plus the topic modeling we just introduced before. The data covered from the January to May in the 2020, and it contains over 65 languages globally. So that's why we use the BERT algorithm and training our BERT and validate it. The second question, we use some like the regression discontinuous design RDD method, which is widely adopted in economy. So we use it to study the global evidence of mental health resilience during the COVID. The last is a very important question, which can inform policy makings, is to quantify the impact of lockdown on people's mental health. So we try to use some like a synthetic control method, which can study the causal relationship between the lockdown policy and the response of mental health. So by using this data set, we studied the global sentiment and the mobility and epidemic evolutions during our studies. So here we first choose the time series of global standardized daily sentiment score in gray here, and also we compare it with the Google mobility data set. We only show the transit here. So it can see after WHO announced the COVID as the global pandemic. So you can see the mobility significantly decreased, and also followed by the decrease of the sentiment over time. Here we also show the daily number of geotagged tweets in blacks and the share of COVID related tweets every day. So the time series, and also here we also show the time series of daily new confirmed cases in purple, which was collected from the Johns Hopkins University. So the evolution of COVID related tweets is very interesting. So after the WHO announced all the first case come to that country, the topic about the COVID is significantly increased, especially in India. After during the lockdown period, actually the COVID-related tweets contain the larger proportion of this topic in all the tweets. So it means all people care about the COVID in their daily life. We also using observe the sentiment and its trend. We're using the seasonal and the residual components to decompose the sentiment trend. So here it only shows the original time series of the sentiment, but we all know the people's behavior, including the sentiment, have the frequencies cycles. So we're using this decomposition method. We only care about the trend of the sentiment here. After we get this time series for each countries, we can have this plot to show the standardized the sentiment index by countries. The vertical lines just show the time of the WHO did not declared COVID-19 as a pandemic, and the purple line represents the sentiment neutrals. That is the lowest point of each country. For example, the first lowest country is China before the Spring Festival, but most of the countries suffered after WHO announced COVID as a global pandemic. So it's clear to see the sentiment changes over time. To measure the pattern sentiment or the duration created by the COVID-19, we developed two global index, sentiment drop and sentiment recovery half-life. So the sentiment drop means we first defined the sentiment drop. The sentiment drop is defined as a country's sentiment decline from the level before the pandemic to its lowest value during the first wave of the pandemic. For example, in United States, the sentiment drop is from here to here. And then we define the second index, sentiment recovery half-life. Here we also take USA as example. So when the sentiment reaches the lowest, they will recover. It's like a natural patterns. They follow most of countries follow the exponential functions. So we just define the half-lives as their sentiment recovery index. For example, USA, after 8.87 days, it will recover to half of their normal state. But some countries, like the Spain, during our study period, their sentiment still lower than its normal stage. That is to see this Spain is still under the recovery stage of the pandemic. We also label it in purple in this map. So we can then mapping the sentiment drop globally. So here globally, actually the Australia and Spain suffer the most during the pandemic. We can see the sentiment shock in standard deviations to mapping it, and also the recovered half-life. Like I said, the purples doesn't recover until the end of the May. We further to explore the relationship between the sentiment shock and sentiment recovery during the pandemic. We found, based on the drop and recovery index by country, we explore the heterogeneity in shock and recovery, noting that noting these explanations are correlations, should not be used as the causals. We found that countries with higher culture, for example, like the China, have a smaller sentiment shock, but countries with higher government efficiency have fast sentiment recovery. For example, also like government efficiency is a valuable index to measure the intervention of the government during the pandemic. We found that they have the negative correlation between these two indexes. Next, finally, we show how sentiment data with high temporal frequency can allow us to have timely evaluation of the policy effect. Given the absence of the vaccine during the first wave of the pandemic, many governments implement a series of NPIs to contain the spreading of the virus, with lockdown being the most stressed ones. We found that we're using the synthetic controls to study the causal relationship between the lockdown and the impact of lockdown on the expressed sentiment. The synthetic control compare the similar countries with very similar pandemic and sentiment trend before the pandemic. That is, before the pandemic, the two countries, lockdown countries and the synthetic countries, follow the similar patterns. Results show that lockdown is followed by the small positive sentiment change, particularly for the developed countries, for example, like the United Kingdom, but have some like negative effect for the developing countries, for example, like India, because people may concern their income or daily life after lockdown. So we can see the developing countries and developing countries, their citizens have totally different response to the lockdown policies. That's also our main findings here. Next, I will talk about another example about the air pollution and happiness. This idea is very similar to the previous studies because it is well known that as the largest developing countries, China has significant air pollution problem. High level of ambient air pollution has caused sickness. Most of current studies are concerned about the air pollution effect on health. But how about the air pollution effect for the society, especially their daily happiness or the subject well-beings is unknown. But how to measure the social cost of this kind of social cost of air pollution? We try to answer this question. For this studies, we adopt the citizen sensings to measure the sentiment and emotion change and study their relationship with the political matters. The basic idea is that we use billions of geotech Weibo's posts to calculate the sentiment matrix with the natural language processing techniques. For example, like the case here. After control the other variables, for example, like the weather's income and city properties, we finally distinguish the relationship between the PM 2.5 concentrations and the humans' happiness. There are some main findings. For example, one standard deviation of increase in PM 2.5 concentration is associated with 0.43 standard deviation increase in happiness score, and they have this kind of heterogeneity impact among people and geographics. Here just show the map of the geographic Weibo post, PM 2.5 concentrations and their relationships nationally. Here we just define our happiness index, range from 0 to 100. We found this have a negative relationship here. But we all know that when we're using the ordinary least square to estimate their relationship, we found the air pollution have the endogeneity problem when we're using the OL's estimations, which may be yet a biased result. So we introduced an instrument variable approach. We use the cross-boundary air pollution offers a way to conduct such instrument variables. So we both have the OL's estimation and also have the instrument variable estimations to study their causal relationships. Before the analysis of the heterogeneity effect of air pollution on sentiment on different days, the sentiment index is larger during the weekend and holiday, while lower than when disaster and the tourist happens. People are more sensitive to the PM 2.0 concentration during the weekend and holiday than the weekend and non-holidays. The extremely heat and extremely cold weathers will further aggravative to the air pollution negative effect on the pollution levels. They further studied the heterogeneous effect of the air pollution on sentiment across population group. For example, there's a male and female. We found males are more sensitive than males when PM 2.5 increase. And local people are more likely to be upset when air pollution increased compared to non-locals, indicating a long-term pollution exposure effect. Both the rich and the poor are less sensitive to the air pollution than the middle class, because the rich people have the protection measures, for example, like the air purifier. So the last case study, I just gave a brief introduction about our recent studies about the climate change and global sentiment. Previously, we have published one paper on One Earth to study this question. Now we conduct a global study about the global sentiment to study these questions. For this research, actually, the initial fact is very simple, because the climate change is in fact our society every day. And also in China, the climate change is also a big issue. With the IPCC models, so the future temperature will keep rising in the middle and in the end of the century. But there are also wealth of evidence demonstrate that climate change, especially the warming temperature and the extreme rainfall, have caused significant impact on natural and human societies, like lower the economic growth, threatening food security, increased risk of conflict, and also some other outcome, for example, like health outcome. But the psychological cost of the climate change is uncertain. To estimate the climate change on people's well-being across the world is essential for developing mitigation and adaptation strategy. But most of the existing studies are conducted in the developed and rich countries. For example, in USA, Ballet study how people's psychological well-being linked with the extreme weathers. And also, for example, Marshall Burke also studied the climate change will increase the suicide rate. But why we choose this topic in China? Because China is like a larger developing countries, have huge geographic coverage to study the spatial, and it provides a good place to study the spatial and temporal variations. And also China have some like adaptation techniques, which might differ from USA. For example, China have centralized heating to adapt to the cold temperature, and also have the air conditioning to reduce the heat exposure. We're using a similar framework study. We're using a fixed effect model to study how the climate, especially the extreme climate, affect humans' sentiment. Here, we're using the high frequency China social media and investigate how stress sentiment is alerted by the daily temperature and other daily weather facts. Here, this shows the data set about the geotech social media data we collect in China. We found some interesting patterns. For example, the sentiment rised up to the maximum temperature of the 20 to 50 degree. and declined afterward. For the most comfortable temperature, people have the highest sentiment scores, but most people are very sensitive to the extremely hot temperature. And other climate weathers, for example, the precipitation will worsen and the high wind speed and cloud cover will also reduce sentiment. Increased air pollution also worsens the sentiment as we introduced before. We're also using the individual level data to study these questions. That is, say we collect individuals, their historical tweets to study how human sentiment, because with sentiment alert by different temperatures, because people may post different posts in different temperatures. It provides a good way to study these questions. We found this pattern also have heterogeneous effect temperature on among 4 seasons across the summer and spring and fall. Fall actually is the most comfortable seasons. People like fall. We found these patterns as well. Interesting heterogeneous effect among temperature sentiment. For example, we found females are more responsive to uncomfortable temperatures than the males, and sentiment of rich cities suffer less from unpleasant pressure cold temperature by higher city level average income does not appear to reduce the effect of hot temperatures. Although there's rich cities, but they follow the similar patterns with the poor cities. We also found some interesting adaptation strategies, how it will alert people's express sentiment. As we talk about first about the marginal effect of the air conditioners, we found that air conditioners in poor and rich countries does not significantly change the effect, but the heatings will significantly increase the sentiment score in winter time. But we use this quasi experiment to study this question using the Qingling Mountains and the Huaihe River to divide, because in the north, people will cities will have the heatings, but in the south, it doesn't have the heating. We compare 2 groups, study these questions. We also project our future impact by using the climate change models. For example, we found that in the future, with the increase of rising temperature, actually, especially in summertime, most places will suffer from the rising because of the rising temperatures. Now we also study this question globally using the global data set to study the climate change and global sentiment. By using the techniques we introduced before, we want to study the following 3 questions. First, about the belief in climate change, using the text analysis to study how people communicate on climate change topics. What term are most effective for the communicating on this issue? We also want to study the social consequence of psychologies globally. Last, we want to study the climate change and behavioral change, not only the text, but how humans' mobility behaviors using a geotext social media post. We want to study the behavioral changes. Last, I want to follow some discussion with. The 3 case studies here, I'm mistaken, illustrate the power of social media data to study the granular, high frequency, unsolicited indicators of human conversation and behaviors, especially relevant in countries where traditional data infrastructure is poor to study some social problem. They provide tangible insight for the policymakers, for example, like the policy for the lockdown policy for the COVID-19, climate change adaptation, and air pollution policies. And also, we admire social media data also present important limitations. For example, the algorithm cannot fully understand humans' behavior, humans' languages, new metrics, and also the representative issues. For example, the social media data may potentially have the sample bias issues. We admire this question and also have some techniques for the sample corrections, but we still admire this issue also represent in our samples. So summary of research, I think this the same slide I present in the first page. We use the social media and also the natural processing coupled with the econometrics models. For example, the fixed effect models, the IV instrument variable estimation, and also now we're also using the different quasi experiments designed to study this question for the policy makings. Okay, that's all. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
Any question?
Jianghao. Yeah, very interesting, insightful, and also very comprehensive talk. The three case studies are really impressive. Now the floor is for questions. Okay, Tony, you raise your hand first.
Hi, Jianghao. Congratulations for a range of very impressive case studies. And I think I'm totally on board, agreeing with you that social media data is extremely useful. It revolutionizes the horizon and the frontier of empirical research in social sciences. I have two very basic questions. Given the fact that you have such a comprehensive, wide-ranging set of applications, I wonder, two of the limitations, actually not two, there are a number of limitations you have mentioned, that as a social scientist, you would like to be careful and watchful about them. And how you would help us to understand better in the process of conducting these diverse applications. How do I address the question of validity of social media data? We know that especially in text data, there's lots of noise. You pick up something that may or may not be true signals. And it's a constant problem everywhere, wherever you go, whatever the outcome variable we're interested in. You told us the interesting questions and how you conduct the analysis and the findings. You skip over the dirty part. How do you handle those dirty validated questions? That's question number one. Question number two is, in all your applications, it's very interesting, given that you apparently are geographical scientists, you're sensitive to location. And all your data, both the outcome and type of question you address, are related to locations, spatial distribution. How do you, in your analysis, handle the likely problem of spatial and temporal autocorrelation, an area and a problem that Wang has made important contributions? Do you regard it as a standard problem that all potentially all, almost all or most users of social media data have to be highly sensitive to? And if you, what is your assessment? If it is not so important, then is it true that based on all the three case studies you have done, have you done the sensitivity analysis so that, no matter how you try to handle spatial and temporal autocorrelation, they don't make much difference or not? So those are the two basic questions that I would like to learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tony Tong. Thank you for your inside questions. I think two questions are very important and also challengeable to answer. First, I think the data issue is very important. Like I present here some like challenge and interpretation about the social media content. And also here, most of the data I use here is the geotagged social media content. It also may have some like selection bias issues. Like what I present here, most of the social media contents are located in the developed regions, and the poor region maybe have very limited samples, and also different countries have different cultures, different posting behaviors, and also their willingness to share their locations. And when they share their location, maybe they want to share more happier state or effective stage of their post. So they are all this kind of selection or representative data selection bias issues, which is challengeable. And also in previous study, we try to adapt several kind of machine learning and statistical method to correct this selection bias issues in our data samples. For example, we're using the age structure from the sensors to correct the age representative issues among in the social media content, especially I was studying in China, because most of the social media users tend to be younger and well educated. So it's a very simple way to correct these issues. And also, as you said, the social media data have tremendous of noise, like robots and misinformations, such kind of issues in social media content. Currently, with the help of the computer science, especially natural language processing, there are several algorithms can automatically detect the robot and misinformations, and also some like other kind of or like advertisement post. We all remove such kind of noise from the social media content. Let us see. When we carry out this kind of social media data analysis, we may pay over 90% of our time in data collection, data tightness, and also this kind of data infrastructure, because the data set is very large. And also, although like this kind of data issues also can correct some like this kind of limitations, but there's still some challenge. For this challenge in our current research, but I didn't present here, we follow some other kind of way to better use the social media content for social science study, especially computer science, computational social science study. For example, now we collect millions of Twitter users on social media, not only collect the geotagged social media content, but they are all historical posts, because Twitter allowed us to collect latest 3,000 of their posts. So this kind of post can regard as a panel or the cohort of the study. So we can study their behaviors or response to some social or the policy event. For example, we use millions of users who we test their vaccination behaviors. We know exactly whether they have been vaccinated or not. We know each user's informations there, and also their timeline. We call it like a cohort of people. Then we use this kind of design to study the causal relationship about the policy intervention, for example, in public health, vaccinations, how vaccination will alert or change people's mobility behaviors or the happiness or their social economic statement and their daily lives. For example, their topics change after this kind of policy interventions. So that is C. When we use the social media content, we not only use this kind of data, we also need to try to follow some like natural experiment design. We cannot do some like a real experiment on social media, but we can design some like natural experiment or causal experiment by using some like a time series as a interventions and also the geographic interventions, geographic as an experiment. For example, here we're using the winter heating borders as a natural, using the geographic location as a to conduct the causal experiment to study the causal relationship between the phenomena. I think it's still an open question for computational social science, especially previously most of the computational social science involved by the computer science, not the social science or the economist. So, but after the social scientists, especially the psychologists, economists, they bring the causal inference techniques. For example, the difference in different design, in inference variable estimations, and also refer the RDD, such kind of new techniques into the social media studies. I think that's the development and also the future of the computational science, social science should pay attention to. That is not only about the techniques itself, but also focus on the real social science problem, and also using the like the experiment thinkings to study the social phenomena. I think I also answer your second question regarding the spatial and the temporal issues. That's my thoughts on this. To use this information to conduct the causal experiment to better understand our social problem. Thank you again for your fantastic questions.
Thank you for your detailed answer. Thank you.
Okay, Jamie.
Hi, Jianghao. I'm Jamin. I'm a assistant professor in sociology here at UHK. So first of all, this is fascinating work on many different and very important topics. I think the key innovation lies in the sentiments detected from social media with the good use of like machine learning and BERT tools. But I think I'm fundamentally wondering like what people post on social media. So I agree like they do express their feelings like their personal diaries. From a different standpoint, they also exchange information, not much involving like emotions there. So I can think of some cases where companies promote their products, and we as academics also use social media to disseminate scientific findings, right? So how much of the post actually conveys sentiments? I think the good models, however good they are, like might have pitfalls in classifying the null sentiment, right? So basically, we have like axis here, like there's a negative sentiment and positive sentiment, but I think lots of posts might fall into like the null sentiment, and thus affects like the classification into like negative and positive emotion. So I think why it's matter, because I think it can factor into the R-square of your model, perhaps, let alone the linear association that you mainly presented. Yeah, so, but don't get me wrong, like I'm totally in favor of social media data, and I think the benefits of using social media data exceeds the cost of typically like sampling issues, because I think it can help us discover the global patterns otherwise uncovered with traditional data. I'm totally with you, but I'm kind of like encountering like similar problems when I deal with this kind of data, because many of the posts are not quite relevant to the issues that I'm researching. So I just want to hear your general opinions on that.
Thank you, Jamie, for your great questions. So I think it's very important. Actually, when we started our studies, we mostly use this kind of data set. But here, when we started, for example, like take air pollution or climate change as an example, we not only care about the topics related to air pollution issues and climate change issues, we also pay particular attention to the topic not related to this air pollution or climate change issue. But we just take this as an example. Because actually, when people talk about climate change or air pollution, it's only take very limited percentage on social media, like air pollution only 0.4%, and also climate related on less than 1%. But the COVID, like I present here, is over like 5% at the most. But India maybe more over 10% during the pandemic. So actually, in our most of the study, we just drop the topic related the post, because we want to see not only the people who talk about the topic we concern, but also this kind of environmental change, for example, air pollution, will generally impact people's daily life, and generally will impact not only people talk about COVID, but also people not talk about COVID, how COVID will alert their daily life. So I think in our study, it doesn't matter about the data coverage for the COVID, air pollution or climate change issue, because we want to study this kind of public health emergency and global change issues on people's daily life. So it's not a problem. But for other research, for example, like crime or the political issues, but this kind of data sample selection bias or samples are significantly important. For example, like the political study, to study the political polarization issue, is particularly all misinformation issues on social network. So the topic related to this topic is very important to study these phenomena. Many social or political scientists in USA pay attention to this topic by using the social media content, particularly for the misinformation during the present selection and also the COVID. I read a number of this kind of papers. I found just using several kind of ways, they pay special attention to some particular account or political users. For example, the demographic and also the some like people from different parties, their opinions change. For this kind of studies, we can use some like user-based studies to avoid the selection bias. For example, this kind of geotext social media. But when we use the user-based approach, they have difficulty determining their geographic locations. But most of the phenomena actually occurred in both space and time. That's also my most interest. But it fully depends. But social media also provides some like ways to determine their locations. For example, they're using their ordinary check-in place and also their register locations or their self-report locations to study the phenomena. That's my very preliminary thoughts on this problem. Thank you, Jamie Lee. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, then next, Yu Ying.
Hey, Thank you, Dr. Wang, for your very fascinating talk. I'm really interested in the social settlement. And the 3 studies have nicely presented the trends from the social media data. I have a few questions, and some of them are comments. The first one is because you mentioned that you have used the fixed effect. I would like you to clarify when you use the fixed factor, so is that individual fixed effect? So try to adjust the individual unobserved traits. So I'm just wondering, because some of the people post more frequently than others. You know, many people kind of addicted to internet, and some people randomly post or who never post. So when you use a fixed effect, so how did you adjust this? Another related question is when you use kind of transfer the social media data into this data set and conduct statistical modeling, and we conventionally assume we have assumption it's a random sample when we conduct statistical modeling, then so that we can make a statistical inference. When you use social media data, it's always biased. So I just wonder, so what would be the gap between how to bridge the gap of the apply the statistical modeling and make a statistical inference based on this kind of the selected data as a non-random sample. So this is my first question. And the second one is also related to the data. So it seems you kind of consider the gender, age. You mentioned to Tony's question, how to adjust the age. And in social media, and not all the social media, they kind of identify the gender and their income, especially income. So I wonder how this kind of the information has been generated. And then lastly, because I'm a social demographer, I'm a fan of the large survey data, especially panel longitudinal survey. So I think the social media data is a very nice kind of a supplement, or kind of they can supplement with each other in the social studies. I would like to hear some of your comments. So how the social media data can kind of bring benefit beyond the panel data of the large scale social survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tong, for your four questions. Four questions are very important, and I would like to try to explain it one by one. First, is like a technical issue about the regressions, how we take into the individual fixed effect in our model, right? The fixed effect models. For example, just take this paper example to study the extreme temperature versus sentiment. This is a basic regression model we adopt here. The main explaining variable is the temperature, and other maybe controls, and the response variable is sentiment. We take several kind of fixed effect, for example, like date fixed effect to control the variation among days, and the city fixed effect, we compare it. First of all, we aggregate our data into city by day. So that's why we using these two fixed effect. We also using the province multiply months fixed effect to control, to consider about the spatial temporal autocorrelation issues in our studies. We cluster our errors by province. That's our study. But regarding your question, how we study the individual fixed effect here, as you said, most people only post very limit. For example, we just plot the Weibo post frequency among users. You can see most people only post very limit in our samples, but several people maybe post over 100 in 1 year. To study the individual fixed, to take the individual's sentiment, take individual as an example, we use the individual for our studies. We only take the users who post over 50 posts in a year. That is, say, at least a user posts over 50 times in different temperatures. So they provide a panel, incomplete panel to study these questions by using the similar functions of regression models, but we change it not to the city fixed effect, but to the individual fixed effect here. But you can see the individual fixed effect models, the result is follows the very similar patterns here, right? So I think the first question, I just want to answer the first question. The second question is challengeable for me. As you said, most of social media collection maybe not the random sampling. We admire this. For example, like here, most people post limit samples, but several people, very few, very limited people post a lot on social media content. That's the sample bias. To be honest, like what I answered to Jamie, and we cannot. It's very hard for us to correct this selection bias issues when we use the geotagged post here. But when ongoing project we conduct here by just collect the data by users. We collect all their historical posts like a cohort. We try to use this kind of data collection way to avoid the selection bias, because we can determine which user we want to collect. We can randomly select users or use a stratified random sampling to determine our samples to avoid the sampling bias. For here, we can only we admire the sample composition issues in our studies. And after aggregation to particular spatial like the country level, it will avoid or reduce the sample selection bias. But when we investigate the individual level, the selection bias exists here. The third question about how to determine the gender and income issues actually is a very good question, because in Twitter, actually Twitter does not provide any useful personal information. For example, like gender, at least gender, it doesn't provide. But Weibo, they said they can provide very comprehensive user information. For example, the gender, educations, their job information, and some people also provide some income information. For the income, it's very hard. There are several kind of ways. The simplest way using the supervised or unsupervised machine learning method. Let's say we collect their all historic posts. We using supervised or artificial intelligence algorithm to training our models. Then we can classify the people into the middle class, high income, or low income. There are many open source tools to confirm this. But for gender issue in Twitter, actually recently we use a normal way. We collect all the their header, their photos in their social media. We're using the facial recognition open source, because we can see, for example, currently you can see me using my photo as on my social media. Then you can determine my age and my gender. In US, we also determine their race. So that is, say, we use some of the artificial intelligence to determine the social demographic information of the users. For example, we adopt the M3. I forgot the algorithm, the name of the algorithm. They call it M3. to automatically determine their age, gender, and race informations. That's valuable to study the social problem. The fourth question is valuable. I like this question because that's the one promising direction in computational social science. That is to combine both the traditional survey data and the social media online big data. Because survey have so many, although I list the limitation of the survey here, but we all know survey is we cannot replace survey for our social science studies. It's valuable, but we can use both of them in social science studies. For example, during the pandemic, we conduct the RCT in Zhengzhou, China, to study how Pacific people go to park and restaurant after pandemic. This paper was just published in PNAS. We conduct RCT. We conduct several surveys before, during, and after the lockdown policies, and to see people's perception on risk of go to restaurant, go to parks. And also we use the social media content collected in parks and restaurants to study the people's perceptions towards this. We use both these sources to study these questions. I think we can combine both to study more social questions here. And also we all know for the emotions or the social sentiment study, I forgot the name of the organization who published the World Happiness Report every year. This World Happiness Report, actually previously they used the traditional surveys to collect the happiness index globally. But now they also use the social media content to study these questions by following the similar way we conduct here using a bird. And also I found this report for 2022. I found they start to use these techniques for the world report, a happiness report. Yeah. Okay, thank you again for your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang, for your
Thank you.
answers.
Okay, so next question was asked by a student, and she asked if there were any raw social media databases available for free public access.
Yeah. As many students ask these questions. Actually, as what I said, we start, you can visit our website, globalsentiment.mit.edu. We built an open collaboration platform, collect the worldwide geotagged social media content and other kind of, like what I said, the historical individual level post for this kind of studies. There are many open source tools for you to collect the social media content, especially for Twitter, but they only have very limited data set. And also you can reach out to me or to our platform to acquire the geotagged social media content for your research content. Actually, we will share, for example, at the very initial, we can share the sample data set for you. For example, 1% of the samples. Then if your algorithm is workable, you can deploy your algorithm in our server and also using our data set to conduct your research questions. Beyond that, I can introduce some like valuable data source for these studies, particularly for the social media content. I think I can share my screen on this, not here. I can provide several data sources for you if you are interested on this. Just stop sharing and share another here. For example, we collaborate with Harvard. They provide this Harvard Center for Geographic Analysis, Geotech tweet achieve. We already provide some like data set for this, but we only provide the Twitter ID. You need to retrieve their original tweets because Twitter not allowed to share the original tweets, but we allowed to share the Twitter ID for this. And also for the global study, I recommend this catalog docnow.id, this platform. They provide, you can see, over 6 billion of tweets to study most of the social problem. For example, the COVID-19 or some other kind of studies, political studies, how many samples they provide. This is also an open platform to collect the data source. But as I said, for this study, they only provide the Twitter ID. You need some like, here, like these tools to retrieve their historical tweets, the 4 tweets for your study. For example, if I ran this tweet historical database, they contain over 1 billion of tweets for your studies. And also, if you're a political scientist, you can use study the U.S. presidential elections, right? And also some like COVID-19 or they said or hundreds of millions of multi-language COVID-19 tweets with location informations. So data is there, but you need clear questions, research questions for your studies. Okay.
Okay, sorry, we still have one more question. Qingliang, please.
Hi, Professor Wang. I have actually a couple questions. First, I saw in your slides that you're using the deep neural network, such as BERT, for the sentiment classification. This rate of this correct classification is about 80%, if I read it correctly. So my question relating to this point is, what are those what is the big issue of this sentiment classification? And maybe your thoughts on how to improve this. I mean, I understand the sentiment is probably only one of the NLP tasks, and there may be something more complicated, and the task could get exponentially more difficult. Yeah, so that's the first question. The second is regarding this identification. I saw you use the synthetic control method, instrumental variable method, and so on. So my question is a little bit detailed. So for example, for the IV, you use this cross-border spillover. Yes, I'm just curious because I also interested in this IV.
Okay.
I'm just very curious, like how do you measure this kind of a cross-border air pollution? And how you justify the validity of the IV? Yeah, so that's my 2 questions for the time's sake. So I mean, overall, I'm really interested in your research, and thank you very much for your talk today.
Thank you. First of all, I can first explain your questions. Your questions regarding the BERT classification issues. Actually, I think BERT is very complicated because Google pre-trained their samples on their server and also provide their training result. Then we use their training samples to label our post and determine their post. using some very simple classification method to determine their sentiment scores. And also we determine that the English language is, because we also conduct some like independent validations. You can check our paper, especially in the appendix. We have very detailed explanation how we check the accuracy of the classifications. As you said, they are not only BERT, but also other state-of-the-art techniques. I highly recommend you to read this book, Text as State. They have so many explanations on how to use the text for your research. I think it also include what I taught here. For your question regarding the econometrics models, actually, yes, our team is across discipline teams. I have expertise on computer science, econometrics, and also the our team also have the scientists focused on the econometrics and also the natural language processing. This guy is an expert on this. And for this, I think our innovation is not only use the social media content, but also we introduce econometrics models into our studies. Otherwise, like just a relationship or just like a correlation studies. So for example, like here, the air pollution study, our innovation is like we introduce the cross-border. That means we use the wind directions from upstream cities, their pollution level as the IVs, as to address the endogeneity issues. I think it's a little bit complicated. I highly recommend you read our paper. We have very clear explanations how we use the wind direction and the wind speed and the pollution from upstream cities as our IVs to improve the causal estimations of the air pollution expressed happiness. Yeah, as well as this kind of synthetic control method. I think that's also our contributions. Not only use some like statistical method, very simple statistical method, with the synthetic control to control the countries with very similar pandemic and sentiment trend before the pandemic, before the lockdown. Actually, we have over 10 pages of supplementary to explain these issues, how we use this synthetic control method to study these questions. Sorry, I think if you want to know the details, I highly recommend you to read the papers. Yeah. Any questions? Have I answered all your questions?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So actually, we have overrun for about 15 minutes, but it's okay. I think it's really a fantastic talk. I enjoyed it very much. I would like also to thank all the audience for your participation. Yeah, thank you very much. Also, especially thank Jianghao for your wonderful talk.
Thank you, Professor Wang, for invitation. Yeah, thank you. And we invite you to visit our institute next time, because previously I remember you gave a talk in our lab previously. Yeah. After this pandemic, maybe we can have some visitation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Tony Tan, and thank you for all your joining us. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Bye.